Welcome, everybody. This is going to take me 20-30 minutes. You might want to sit down.
Good.
Just as you're looking at what's coming up here, I just wanted to mention that next Monday at this time, we've got a bunch of students who are going to be speaking in these lightning talks, which should be real fun. So we're going to hear short bits of a lot of cool stuff going on. And I'll just mention Brady Davis, Sarah Ebel, Daniel Mistro, Casey Fitzgibbon, Lydia Horn, Sonia Berthasol, Emma Fox, Bree Berry, everything from cheese to sustainable tourism to climate change. So should be real fun. I hope you can make that. And then the week after, actually, we do have a guy here from Vermont that is being hosted by a project that's funded by the Mitchell Center on this. Artisanal cheese in Maine, and this kind of community and economic development together with how you do that in terms of sustainable environmental processes. So lots of cool things coming up. And then I think the final one of the year is on December 5th, when we'll have what I'm pretty sure is the world's expert on dam removal, Laura Wildman, who will be coming up. So that should be fun. The following Monday, this is so new that no one knows it yet, there's going to be a party here on the 12th. When we do the not just a holiday party, but the awards stuff. Are you thinking something around?
What, is it 12th? I thought it said the 21st.
No, sorry. I'm confusing Aram and probably everybody else in the room. The 21st is cheese, I think. Does that sound right?
28th is cheese.
Oh, yeah. 21st. What's 21st is lightning talks.
Right.
Doing this from my brain, which is always a bad sign. December 12th at the last Monday, it's actually as finals weeks begin, we're going to have a holiday party, and we'll be doing these things we've been doing for a number of years now of awards for a really innovative work that students and faculty and their partners are doing. And so an email will go out soon to people. We're soliciting nominations for those, and we'll be recognizing those folks on December 12th. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce Kate Dempsey, and it's long before I knew Kate, I certainly knew about the great work of the Nature Conservancy. I'm not convinced I was a steady member back when I was in high school, because I was often short on money to be a member, but I promise you I at least started then, and I've been with it for a really long time ever since, so it's a great organization. But to me, what's really wonderful about having Kate here, she's the, as of this year, the director of the Maine chapter, is not just her 13 years of work at the Nature Conservancy, which has been really innovative. I'll just tell you a little bit more and let her take it from there, but also the work she did before she got there as a staffer on economic development issues, among others, with both U.S. Congressman Tom Allen in Maine and Congressman Marty Meehan in Massachusetts. And in fact, she and Linda Silka have close connections because Marty Meehan was it's the chancellor, right, is how it works in the University of Massachusetts system at UMass Lowell, where we're lucky to lure Linda from, and he's now the university president of the entire system. And Kate was a staffer, so that's deep connections there. Kate, one reason why when we stand on this amazing island in the middle of the Penobscot River, we can celebrate the fact that this world-renowned restoration sort of happened and is happening as we speak, right? 2 million river herring or so this year, up from 600 or something, way low numbers just a few years ago. So something kind of amazing in so many different ways. But not just that, the 2014 Clean Water Bond, the work on things like the Katahdin Forest Project, and increasingly kind of looking, I would say, and I think this is something we're all doing, and maybe we're even more aware of after the last week, is that we probably can't get to our conservation goals if we also don't pay attention to community and economic development goals. And I know many of you are doing great work there, and one of the wonderful things about having Kate here today is to help us kind of keep thinking about this. One of the things I want to just add here is that if you go on to, if you either look at TNC, I've had the pleasure of working with them for maybe 25 years and in various partnerships long before I got to Maine, but if you go onto their website and kind of see what they're about, what's in their DNA. This commitment, and this is from their website, their commitment to respect, integrity, diversity, and lasting results, I think aligns very much with what we do here. Obviously, the fact that Senator Mitchell's name is on the program, there's someone whose his commitment to mutual respect and his integrity has been a key to all his success. In fact, Aram, if you want to just hold up his book, if you want to know more about where that comes from, just go read his memoir that came out last year. The lasting results part is exactly why we put the word solutions on our program. Not just kind of studying things, but how can we make a difference for the long haul? And not going to be easy. I'm sure that Kate could tell you efforts that the TNC's done that didn't go as smoothly as they hoped. She's just here from Africa, by the way, where they're doing amazing work, and we'll hear about that as well. But one of the things, again, that's a key part of Mitchell's life is just because it was hard to do doesn't mean he didn't try. And I think that's kind of worth us all thinking about. It's a great pleasure to have you here today, Kate.
Thank you, David. As he said, my name's Kate Dempsey, and I'm the state director with the Nature Conservancy here in Maine. I started my job in this role about 10 months ago. Prior to that, I was most recently our external affairs director. And I have the privilege of knowing Mac Hunter for the last 13 years, who's been on our board. And as David said, Linda and I worked actually on some, I think it was labor and OSHA stuff, right? Linda taught me about workplace health, and so long ago, probably 20 years ago. So that's a little intimidating on many fronts. So when David, let me also introduce my colleague, Tim Paul, who's here. He's our communications manager, and I'm so glad he was able to come up with me and participate and be available to help answer questions at the end as well. So when David and Tim and I first spoke about this opportunity, of course I was honored to be here, and it's such a thrill. And I thought I would talk about the Penobscot River Restoration Project, which all of you know probably as much about as I do in some ways, though I can tell some good backstory conversation in the Q&A. And many of you have done research on the river, for which we will really be eternally grateful, because that baseline research that was done on the Penobscot means that we know how many fish are on the river today. And one thing I'll talk about that I just learned in Africa, my board members have been banging us over the head about this, but measures matter. And being able to talk about where you were and where you are today is really important. But that's not what I wanted to say exactly. So when we first talked about this, we thought we'd talk about the Penobscot. But in case you hadn't noticed, a couple things have happened in the last week. And so I'm going to change it up a bit. And it may not be what you think I'm going to talk about. And so what I'm going to focus on is my trip to Tanzania and talk about how that relates to our work here in Maine. Before I do that, I do want to recognize Gordon Hamilton, who I know was a deep, wonderful friend of all of yours. And on behalf of the Nature Conservancy, we are just so grateful to the commitment the university has made as a whole to understanding the impacts of climate change and the devastation climate change is having on communities and species around the world. And Gordon, I didn't know him personally. I've seen his work. I've read his work, saw him speak. Clearly was an amazing contributor to the knowledge in the society. So I'm sorry for the university and for his family, and recognize the commitment. And to your point, we have to carry on that work. So wanted to mention that. And the other thing, obviously, there was an election last week, and I'm happy to talk, having worked in politics much of my adult life, I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A. I'm not going to focus on it right now. What I am going to focus on is, I think, some hopefulness in the world, because I think we could all use a little hopefulness. So last week, I was in western and northern Tanzania. And I think being in Tanzania solidified for me what the future of conservation needs to look like around the globe. And I think many of us care deeply about human and ecological communities. And all of us come to this work for different reasons. I can tell you how I came to it was through economic and social justice. But what I'm going to show you, I hope, is that wherever you start, conservation and human solutions now have to be integrated. So I'm going to tell you the story of a project that's called the Tuungane Project, which in Swahili means let's unite, which I thought was a really useful thing to know right now. You can use that at parties. So the day begins flying from a small airport in Arusha, which happens to have 1.3 million people. I thought that was interesting, being from Maine. Take off in a small bush plane, fly up over mountains, which I get airsick, so it was not that pleasant. And then, luckily I've been warned, you drop down onto the runway through the clouds from the mountains. And if the pilot doesn't hit the runway just right, you land in Lake Tanganyika. Not a good prospect. And I'm trusting that these pilots are well trained. So had we landed in this lake, which we didn't, we landed, we would have been in a lake which holds 17% of the world's freshwater resources, is home to 250 endemic fish species of cichlids. And interesting, I found this interesting, when it rains and then it starts to clear, you can see the Republic of Congo across the lake. But it's big enough, it's as big as Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, and Lake Champlain combined. It's a mile deep. So if you've heard of Lake Tanganyika, if you're not Mac, you might have heard of it because of because in the forests surrounding Lake Tanganyika, on the Tanzania side are the famous chimpanzees that Frankfurt Zoological, the Japanese government have spent 60 years researching these chimps. And along this huge lake, there are villages that are incredibly remote, and in the villages live perhaps some of the world's most vulnerable people. So once you land at the airstrip, oops, wrong way, you go on this boat, you take the boat across the choppy waves to, the one lodge on the lake that Mahale National Park is right behind it. So there we settle into the lodge and we begin to learn about the work that the Nature Conservancy is engaged in with our partners. And the reason I wanted to talk to you about it is because in my opinion, and from my experience, 13 years of doing specifically conservation work, this may be one of the best places where the integration between human needs and environmental needs are completely integrated. And for us, we think a lot about this thing called the virtuous cycle. NAC was part of Conservation by Design. The virtuous cycle is part of Conservation by Design 2.0. And for us, we start with nature, and then are trying to understand how nature and society can work together to meet common goals. What was interesting to me about being in the Tuungane project is that no matter where you start in this circle, it's all still connected. So let me explain that for a minute. So if you start with people, the people of the villages fish for sardines. sardines. They go into that massive forest to collect fuel for cooking. And then now more and more, they're growing crops into the forest and up against the forest. And in addition, in recent decades, the family size in these villages has increased to a point where the government is now dividing villages and resettling people in new villages on the lake. So then, go back to our circle. If you think about nature, what's happening is as population increases, human population increases, fish population decreases because there's a lot more fishing and there's a lot more impact on this beautiful lake. So fish population goes down, and that's where Nature Conservancy kind of starts. Okay, fish population declining, we've got to have an intervention, right? So that it turns out that these fish not only are amazing, these cichlids and the sardines, but the cichlids do something else really important for people, which is they eat the snails that are in this lake that are carriers of a disease called schistomastitis. Am I saying that right? Anyone who's a schistomastitis, which is a parasitic disease, which if you have it, like many parasitic diseases, you feel very tired, you're a carrier, it's horrible. And so as fish population declines, population is increasing, more people are getting sick because the snail population isn't being eaten. And so more and more people are getting sick, right? That's bad for a lot of reasons. So when I think about the virtuous cycle, I think, okay, where can I intervene? And I've got lots of intervention points. So 10 years ago when the Nature Conservancy started working in this region, we began by having ecological science draw us to this part of the world. Massive forest that's being encroached on by agriculture to feed people. An amazing freshwater resource that's rich in biodiversity. And so, our old approach would say, okay, let's figure out how to conserve those things. But we also did something else there, which is our social science staff, Craig Leisher, who actually did some work here on the Penobscot, came with the team and started having conversations in these villages to begin to hear what was of interest to them. And they all articulated that they too wanted to keep the forest in forest as much as possible. They wanted to keep the lake clean and rebound the fishery. And they also spoke to wanting access to family planning resources, and they wanted their children to be free of this schista disease. So at that time, even that statement, and I hope George Jacobson, who's down at the Darling Marine Center, is listening right now, because as you know, he speaks a lot about population growth and its impact on the planet. And we, the Nature Conservancy, decided at that point that it was incumbent for us to be successful in our strategy to team up with a partner who was able to address the concerns that the communities were speaking to. And so Pathfinder International, which is based in Boston and has a presence here in Maine, in fact one of its founders is from Maine, is a full partner in our project work in the Tuangani project, hence the Let's Unite piece of this. So I can talk about that a little bit more in the Q&A. But so back on that boat, it's a rainy day. It's the rainy season, it turns out. We're going across the lake. The rain is literally coming straight across. We're soaked to the bone. Get off the boat, go to a village, and we're greeted by the villagers. And for those of you who have traveled to remote places where they don't get a lot of visitors, there's lots of signing of books and lots of meetings. And so we go into a very tiny room with fishermen and women who weren't fishermen, but women were in this room and some children. And we sat around, and this was the Fishery Management Council of this village. And I promise you, had I closed my eyes and not had a translator, I could have been in Port Clyde, Maine. People were talking about wanting to have engagement in their fishery, control of their fishery, being able to talk about who came and went into their village management unit in ways that any fisherman in Maine would talk about. And perhaps that was another one of the more remarkable moments of the journey, was to be sitting a gazillion miles away in a village on Lake Tanganyika, and I swear I could have been having the same conversation in Port Clyde. So these village people are setting up their beach management unit, which is their fishery system. Peter here is on our staff, and these are some of his data collectors, and they work for the BMU. They're volunteers for the BMU. So then we leave the meeting. I'm finally starting to not have hypothermia, and an elderly woman grabs my hand and she says, "So glad to see a woman in this meeting." And I was like, "I'm really glad to see a woman in this meeting too." It was just amazing. And she told me in Swahili how this integration between fisheries practices and birth control was allowing them to earn more money and be healthier. And so we walked up then to the health center, and she told me with the translator how important this work has been. And again, this integration is what really stuck with me. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but let me just say, in addition to the fisheries work and the reproductive health work that's going on, this is a side story. These are drying racks for sardines. So TNC developed one or two, gave them to the community. Now people are replicating them. These drying racks are allowing people not to dry the sardines in the sand, which people had always done. Now they're being dried on drying racks, and they get better price for the sardines because they're not cut up at all and they're clean. And it's amazing how, a drying rack can change someone's life. So at the same time, we're also working on a forest conservation strategy, just like we are here in Maine. It was the similarities were remarkable. And we're working beyond these are two national park staff members and two guides to see the chimpanzees. And beyond the national park is this massive forest. So we're working with the national government and the village governments to create forest management areas as well. So talk about sounding familiar. Nobody wants an addition to the national park, but they totally want protection of the forest. And so working together to find strategies to protect the forest that buffers the national park. So I gave you just a little tiny bit. Let me just add one other thing, that another piece of the work is something called model households. And this is rooted in social behavioral science, and basically there are people who compete in the villages to create model households, which they promote reproductive health. They have a latrine that is covered. They have a place to wash hands after they use the bathroom. It's very big, and then agriculture is talked about, and there's agricultural opportunities. And so we got to visit with this family. Actually, this was over near the Serengeti, so a different part of the country, but this model is being replicated in both sections. So just one more picture. One little piece. I was telling Tim this in the car. The cook stoves in the model household are really important because they're fuel efficient. And so when you ask the women, why do these cook stoves matter? They say, well, I have to use less wood. And so I have to go less far into the woods to collect wood. It's much more efficient. And my daughters also come with me, and now they can use that time that they used to use to collect wood to play and study. So I thought that was a beautiful photograph. So in the end, I wanted to bring this project to you. We can talk about the Penobscot. I'm going to turn it over to discussion, really. But here's what I want to leave us with, a couple things. The project I just talked about supports strategies that address each of the major issues that were identified by us and our partners: forest conservation, fisheries management, income generation, village governance, good governance, and reproductive health. So integrate my premise and TNC's premise now is that integrating programs around health, livelihood, and conservation builds community self-reliance and enables a more resilient environment and society. Now, you could say that's maybe particularly in areas where degraded natural resources is in the forefront, but I'd like to have a conversation about when that holds in other situations. So you thought I was going to talk about the Penobscot River Restoration Project, and maybe I'll say 2 words about it. 16 words. The Penobscot River Restoration is one of the more amazing accomplishments that we've all accomplished on the planet, if I may humbly say so. And it is having an impact around the globe, and I can speak to that in Q&A. But you said something that George Mitchell says, which is, you got to keep working. And something that I now think about in reflection on the Penobscot was, I could stand up here and tell you how we raised $30 million from Congress, the arguments we got in with people and agencies. I can tell you about, the ecological baseline monitoring. But to me, what stands out is very similar to this hard work in the Tuangani Project. Is the Penobscot Project began long before the Penobscot Project. So let's just start with that assumption and then start from 1999 and go forward. That's 17 years of dialogue. Dialogue gets really undervalued, but if we collectively, the communities, the nation, the Penobscot Nation, the federal agencies, even the state agencies, and all the partners hadn't stuck together, we wouldn't have accomplished it. And we could have easily turned our backs on each other so many times. We could have gotten annoyed that someone else got press, or, there's so many reasons you could get caught up in petty difficulties of a partnership. But the Penobscot Project, to me, and as Pollyannish as it may sound, I've been in a lot of partnerships. 16 years of sticking together is a remarkable accomplishment. So the money and the ecological and the community results are only there because we all stuck together. Now, it's going to be harder when there isn't one single thing that we're all pointing to, and that might be a fun conversation as well. And I would say, I would just encourage us, and those of you who have been part of those conversations, that's a message I'm trying to carry forward, because I think that dialogue gets overlooked really easily. I'll just end in Millinocket. Tim and I were talking about on the drive up. The Nature Conservancy is a major landowner in the Millinocket region. We own 40,000 acres of some of the most beautiful lakes and mountains in the world, in my opinion. I'm looking at Mac because he spent a lot of time there. And again, you know, talk about divisiveness. Millinocket, you know, is kind of a microcosm of what's going on in the country. And, you know, where there's hope in Millinocket. Again, we've spent quietly waiting for enabling conditions to be right for people to come to the Nature Conservancy, because we stuck to it, to say, let's be in dialogue together. Let's work together to find a new approach. Now, is it going to be easy? No. But people are sitting in rooms together who have absolutely polarized positions on the monument and the park. And those conversations were going on before the designation, and they're, you know, picking up steam now after the designation. And as I said to some of my staff, my colleagues, I guess when I close on, as a conservationist and as the 14th largest landowner in the state, I think it's incumbent to us as a landowner to be part of community dialogue. That it's no longer good enough only to have the most amazing place on the planet, the Dempsey Lake Wilderness, and the best trails and the ice caves that Bill Green talked about 2 days ago on the news, and, you know, amazing hiking trails, and a Maine graduate who worked there all summer talking to people. That's not enough anymore. It's a really good baseline to start from. So, I guess my question is really to you all, is you're all digging into all sorts of research areas and through the Institute doing practical work with people in Maine and organizations. So reflecting on the Tuangani project, the Penobscot, or work in Millinocket, where are you seeing this integration? And how can we challenge ourselves as conservationists to think about the questions differently? So I'm going to close with that. You can, of course, ask me questions, but I'm asking you all a question because I'd love to learn as much from you as I hope I'm offering today. Don't be shy. All right, come on.
What is the conflict now in Millinocket? I understand part of it, but what do the people of Millinocket want? They don't think they're getting.
Do you want to speak to that, Tim? Or you want? No, I better because I'm up here on the microphone. You know, there is a long and storied history in this country of the federal government deciding what happens to communities. You know, the history of the national park is one of which people were moved out to make room for national parks. I learned from one of my students that national parks actually have a long history of segregation. The Jim Crow laws were implicit on the national parks, and that African Americans could only go to certain parts of national parks. I'll get to your question. So think about that legacy just for a minute, and the implications that has on someone. So that's a side note. I mean, I think if Senator Mitchell were here, and I do not ever try to repeat anything Senator Mitchell says because he's so full of wisdom, Millinocket is a place that is, has witnessed a changing global economic situation, and it's hard to adjust to that. And conservation, you could push, we could say that conservation has not yet proven to people that it's making a tangible difference in their lives. Now, I disagree with that. I see it every day in my work, the tangible difference conservation is making in people's economic well-being, in their security of the fishery. But the image of conservation is that legacy of shutting people out and locking the doors. And there is, I'm sure, a suspicion of that. Now, the only way, and this relates to how do we go forward in this world, the only way I know is to sit quietly and listen to differing points of view and try to find common ground with people. And through that, the community has articulated a real interest in tourism that they manage, back to co-management of the resource, so to speak, a real interest in finding some way forward in the forest economy and ensuring that there's a diverse economic way to go forward. And so I think the suspicion is valid based on history. I don't think it reflects where we are today. Tim, anything to add that you?
Yeah,
I know you're not on mic, but so I'll repeat it. But
all right, and I'll be
Come on now.
very loud. But I would say also, I think we're referring to the Katahdin region, so it's Millinocket, East Millinocket, Medway, Patton. There's a lot of communities that are impacted from sort of the decline of the timber industry, and that it's very encouraging at current state to watch people who used to be fighting about this park business are now coming together with a common goal to make a better community. So we're involved with a collaboration of organizations, the Katahdin Collaboration, which is an active sit-down group of representatives from all of those communities and all perspectives that are really trying to move that economic engine.
the other thing I'll mention about the forest economy, and I'm pointing to Mac because he was part of a team of TNC board members, former board members, and staff, where we were recently looking at the forests and climate and what strategies might we deploy together to make sure we're addressing climate change and supporting our forests. And one of our colleagues said something that may sound really obvious, but let me just say it. So again, thinking about the virtuous cycle. If you start with nature, the northern Appalachian mountain forest range is crucial to protecting, and Mac and Aram can tell you a lot about why. And we have used tools over the years to respond to the economic shifts in that forest economy through easements and other interventions. And in doing so, we've kept that forest intact. Again, collectively, we've kept the forest intact. I think today we're in a situation where if we don't figure out a way to keep that for an economic incentive for forestry, that we all lose, whether you're starting at nature or society, because it is the forest landowners who are keeping that forest as forest. Now we have reserves in there, but we need the mass extent of forest in the northern Appalachians. So I think it is now important for the Nature Conservancy to be deeply engaged in conversations that look to how do we support the forest economy in a whole different way. And we don't have the answers yet. Hopefully you, Maine, will be part of the answer. Come on, people.
So it's actually more of a fear of what will be, rather than necessarily something that is taking place now.
I mean, others can speak to this too. I think it is incredibly real that it's very hard to find work in the Millinocket, East Millinocket region. There is no longer a mill there. And so, as Senator Mitchell would say, there's a huge dislocation of a way of life that was the way of life for the last 100 years. And so that's as real as it gets. There's no, you don't have the same opportunity that your father or mother had. So that's real. And so that fear is real, and it's also really frustrating. And currently there's no clear vision about how you get out of that. And so, yeah, it's the in-between stage, I would say. Please dispute or debate or dialogue, Catherine.
I have a sort of response to the
Yes.
question that you posed at the end
Yeah.
of your talk, which is, can you say something about the resources that it takes to do this kind of integration? Because it seems like the Nature Conservancy alone can't be everywhere. In the Tanganyika example, you had a partner that was there and ready, but can you talk about what happens when there isn't that ready-made partner, and how do you have the people that are on either side of this recognize that integration is important, and what kind of resources, money, staffing does it take to make it happen?
So could everyone hear Catherine's question about resources to do kind of a deep dive? Now that's a question we were actually on kind of a mid-action review effort, and that was one of the questions we were wrestling with, because I would say that the Tuangani project, the Northern Tanzania Rangelands Initiative, I have some material on that, are deep dives. And it's very hard to go deep and also go big. And the Nature Conservancy, global organization, we need to be one of the organizations going big, right? So there's like going deep, huge amounts of resources, and then going big. The hope with going deep in a few places is that you have enough models that you learn from those, and that's one of the lessons of Penobscot, is you learn from that, and then you can create policy change and other changes that allow you to go big. Now, it's a huge investment. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but you have Pathfinder International, the Nature Conservancy, Frankfurt Zoological on that project. In this project, you have 6 partners. My favorite one is Honey Guide, which is teaching guides anti-poaching strategies and rangers. I love that name, Honey Guide. It's about the bird that leads you to the nest, the bee's nest. So these are exhausting, deep dive, major staffing. I mean, probably the Tuangani project in place, we probably have 15 TNC staff members. I mean, we even have someone doing, community arts projects so that the community members come and learn through dance and other approaches. So it's a lot of money, and it's a deep dive. And I think in places where we know that we have to be one of the players, we're able to do that, I think. But what we use those projects for is to show bilateral organizations and others why these kinds of investments make a difference. And it won't always be us. And we can't do it alone. Matt?
Traditionally, it's been very easy to measure TNC's progress from year to year, decade to decade. You just look at the number of acres protected and try to, the 45% landowner in the state of Maine, and probably one of the largest landowners in the world, collectively. But is it getting more challenging to get members and or foundations to support efforts that are X number of years of dialogue without necessarily really tangible, well, this is what we did this year in terms of acres protected on the ground.
So for those on the streaming, the question is it harder to raise money for projects that are less, so to speak, tangible? Is that a fair? The answer is yes. Candidly, Mac knows firsthand, the Nature Conservancy in Maine in particular, and around the world as well, but I think Maine has been the standard bearer of big projects that are incredibly tangible. The St. John River, the Katahdin Forest Project, the Penobscot Project with partners. Those are tangible, there's a start and finish. It's kind of equivalent, without diminishing them at all, that legacy, to building a wing of a hospital.
Mhm.
And we're now saying to our supporters, we need your help funding the Alzheimer's research. And we need you to, it's like a university, right? We need you to fund the integration of conversations so that something amazing will come out of it. And there's some people who are right there with us, and there's some people who say, that doesn't look like the Nature Conservancy. You're all about tangible, lasting results. So the answer is yes. The simple answer is yes, it is harder. I think before I turn to Linda, one thing I really picked up on in the Tuangani project is actually, I would say the public health community is better, with the exception of the Penobscot River. They're better at presenting measures than we have been historically. We say, oh, we've saved this and it'll accomplish this. We have this kind of representation of this type of forest. That's tangible and obvious, but I think the Penobscot baseline is a much better, comprehensive place to start. And I would say the public health community is probably more aligned with what you all did on the Penobscot River. Linda?
This is really interesting and great. We have a room filled with students with a lot of interest in natures, and if you, from the Nature Conservancy perspective, could think about what you hope these students are learning or how they'll contribute to the important work ahead, what are your thoughts about what we should be doing as examples here?
Could I just add a little bit? That's a perfect question. So TNC used to use a phrase about science-based conservation, and like Linda said, you've got all of this expertise. There's plenty of the people who've been doing the wonderful conservation biology and related fields here, but you've got tons of social scientists and people from the arts and the humanities. So kind of an addition to Linda's question, if she'll let me, is sort of, so if you are in charge of universities, or you could help mobilize what exists, because they do have the potential to help you think about the connections between nature and society, what does that need to look like to help guide your important work? And so then what should students, how can they kind of live that work in a way that they makes a difference?
Well, there's so many ways. So I would say I came into the Nature Conservancy from a place that most people don't start from, at least when I started 13 years ago. I had a master's degree in urban policy. I had worked in politics and public health. I had focused mostly on economic development and social justice. And I had gone to Tufts University's Urban and Environmental Policy program, and in 1991, a long time ago, there was a lot of tension between urban policy and environmental policy people, and so they integrated us. And I was always a little skeptical about my colleagues on the environmental side because I thought they didn't care about people, right? And so when I came to TNC, I didn't have the language. And the reason I got passionate about the environment is because I personally began to grow my own sense of the world and saw that integration as crucial. Because you can't have healthy communities if you don't have a healthy environment. So for me, that became a driving passion. But when I first came to TNC, I had no idea what Mac and Aram were talking about. I literally couldn't speak their language. And I had done enough conservation work in Congress that I knew how to do conservation, but I didn't know conservation biology at all. Now I know a little bit more, 13 years later. The point of that is we have to learn to speak each other's language. So I think the challenge for us, TNC ahead, is knowing the right questions to ask of ourselves and each other so that we can have projects like the Tuangani project, so that we have social scientists who say, let's talk to the community and hear where they start on the circle. Why are they worried about the fish stock declining? So people who are fluent in dialogue is a really good starting point. To my introduction, your very kind introduction, I can't emphasize enough valuing and learning about the wide difference, diversity, whether it's biodiversity or human diversity, matters to this society and to the future of the planet, is a really important thing for universities to be doing. And then, simply put, the great thing about the Nature Conservancy is that you can be a lawyer and work for the Nature Conservancy. Tim used to work at L.L. Bean as a marketing director at L.L. Bean and now works with us and gets to live his passion through being at the Nature Conservancy. And you can be a finance specialist and work for the Nature Conservancy. So the reality is, while we have a great number of conservation staff, we also have people who keep the organization functioning. As soon as I get in the car, I'm going to think of an even more deep thing to say. Yeah, but for me, it's this question of integration: is can you take disparate points of view or theories and see them from a different side of the prism? And the truth is, most of us, probably all of us, have a really hard time doing that, no matter who you are. There is real sociological evidence that if you have one belief set, all facts reinforce your belief set as opposed to changing your mind. The other thing I would say, David and Linda, is, back to climate change. We know now that we have mostly turned people away from engaging in the issue of climate change. We have scared the heck out of people on climate change, and so they shut down. So I think as a university, moving fast into the social science work and promoting the ways that we can take action as individuals in society on climate change in a way that doesn't turn people off is really important. And I think, the research that you all are doing at the Woods Product Lab and elsewhere is really important because it's really tangible. So, continuing to be a big voice on climate change in every way is really important. Closing.
So, Kate's been, was a couple days ago just been back for 2 days from Africa, so I have no idea what time it feels like here. I'm really grateful for her talk. If you have questions you'd like to come up after, feel free to do it. I'll just thank her again for what.
Thank you.